1. I was in my third and final year at uni, studying archaeology. Due to recurring and severe illness in the second semester of my second year, I had been unable to complete several core subjects and had to repeat them. This included an archaeological field school, held in the mid-year holidays where you would implement the techniques you had already learned. This field school was compulsory if you wished to enroll in a particular subject, but not everyone studying was headed in that direction. I had successfully completed the previous year's field school, but due to my illness, was unable to complete the associated course, so had to retake them both again. This university has a number of campuses dotted around the country, and some overseas. The field school is offered to students on 2 campuses. The main campus, located north of Capricorn, and one of its offshoots located even further north of Capricorn. The field schools are held in the area of the main campus, so those participating are required to travel to attend. For some, it's across town. For others, it's several hours in a car. Needless to say, those attending from the sister campus do not do so lightly or cheaply. My lecturer, whom we shall call Matt, was a bloody legend. He was a brilliant lecturer, has authored 2 books, and is still working in his field, albeit at a different university than the one in this story. He knew his shit, was easygoing, friendly, and would sit and share a jug of beer with you on a Friday arvo, and I only ever saw him angry once. This is important for later. Also note that grading went as follows in descending order. HD, pass with high distinction, 85 to 100%. D, pass with distinction, 75 to 84%. C, pass with credit, 65 to 74%. P, pass, 50 to 64%. PC, pass conceded, 48 to 49%. N, fail, less than 50%. The event. Matt and his counterpart at the sister campus had been granted permission to conduct this particular year's field school in a gully adjacent to a historic and protected listed cemetery. This gully actually split the cemetery in 2 and was used basically as a garbage midden. Due to the nature of the gully, there was only space permitted for a specified number of dig sites. Groups were to be allocated a site once they arrived on the first day, after they had decided on their members. As I was living on campus and I had no car, I knew I'd be unable to arrive at the field school at the specified beginning times. I'd be half an hour late on the Friday and Monday mornings, and a full hour late on the weekend. I'd spoken to Matt about this, and as we knew each other quite well, and had shared jugs of beer quite often, he agreed that I would not be penalized for arriving late, but that I'd most likely be allocated a group to make up numbers, rather than choose my own. It couldn't be helped, so I agreed. Friday rolls around. I arrive at the site a half hour late, all good, and I'm introduced to my group. There are 4 of us. Myself, the only female in the group, but experienced in how the field school is run due to my previous year. Gaza, an older, grizzled male geology student, who was taking the course just as a matter of interest. Baza, a young male geology student who, by all other indications, was heading towards a lucrative career in the mining sector, and Daza, another young male geology student good friends with Baza, also heading towards a lucrative career in the mining sector. All 3 of my counterparts were from the sister campus, so had traveled at some expense to attend. They'd already been allocated a dig site, and when introduced, Matt tells them I've got field school experience, so to utilize my knowledge. Baza and Daza smile and nod, giving me a friendly wave. Gaza grunts, but a little later, while surveying our area, we get to chatting. He's a nice enough bloke, just a bit miffed he's been put in a group with a bunch of young shits, and was worried he'd be carrying us or keeping us in line. Nah, mate. I'm here to get shit done, get the data I'll need for next semester, and hopefully enjoy myself as much as I had the previous year. Now let me tell you, Lara Croft and Indiana Jones have royally fucked the perception of the greater public when it comes to archaeology. No, Jurassic Park doesn't count, as they're paleontologists dealing with animal remains. Archaeology, or archaeologists, deal with human remains. A lot of what happens on an archaeological dig is repetitive and monotonous. You survey your area using surveying equipment, sketch and take photos of your allocated site before measuring out your 1 meter by 1 meter dig pit. You take more pictures and sketches of the as yet untouched pit, as well as taking an initial soil sample. You scrape off a spit of earth. This is a layer of predetermined depth, in this case 5 centimeters, and once done, you test the pH levels of the soil you've removed, documenting everything that you've scraped up. Yep, more photos and sketches. Before taking more photos and sketches of the pit and anything that may be lodged in there before scraping off another spit. If you hit an object, you remove the soil from around it, but don't actually remove the object until you're removing the layer of soil from beneath it. It must remain in situ to preserve the data. Boring, I know, but is also very important for later. Also important to note is soil composition in relation to how deep you can safely dig your pit before extending the boundaries to prevent soil contamination or the walls collapsing. Our dig site had quite loose sandy soil, so it was announced that every 50 centimeters down, we would have to extend the size of the pit by 50 centimeters on each side. It wasn't anticipated that we'd get much beyond 1 meter down, definitely not further than 1.5 meters, so we'd only need to expand once, possibly twice. This was how they had divided up the entire site to fit us all in. It became clear very quickly that neither Baza or Daza had anticipated how monotonous the next 4 days were going to be. Both Gaza and I had to repeatedly call them over to assist us with surveying, and when it came to the soil scraping, they were excited at first, but then became bored as we had to yet again record every minute detail. As I was the only one who had thought to bring my camera along, one that required actual film, as this was before inexpensive digital cameras, smartphones were at least 10 years away, and I was a Provo Uni student. I was the one responsible for taking photos. This included candid shots of the entire field school, other groups and lecturers, and our dig site. Day 1 of the field school ends, and we all head back to wherever for the night, to kick back, relax, and prepare for another day of toil. The next morning, Saturday, I arrive at the field school 1 hour late, so at 10 a.m., as per the bus schedule. Seeing as how I'd already had this okayed by Matt, I'm not anticipating any issue with my tardiness. I get to the cemetery and seeing Matt, give him a cheery, "Morning, Matt, all good, yeah?" Matt turns and glowers at me. I mean, if looks could kill, I'd be right at home in that cemetery with all the other dead people. You know how I mentioned earlier how easygoing and laid-back Matt is, and I've only ever seen him angry once? Well, this was that time. Matt was pacing, teeth grinding, fists clenched. He was pissed. "Just get to your group and get to work," Matt practically snarled at me. I'm worried now that he's angry with me for being late, even though we'd previously squared it. I'm nervous and worried because we'd had a really good rapport in the past. And now I'm thinking that I've done something that's going to make my last semester at uni hell on earth. Have I done something wrong? I know I was late, but like I told you before the field school, this was the first bus I could get out here. I'm really sorry if that's a problem. Matt sighs and shook his head. "Nah, I reckon it. It's not you, you've done nothing wrong. I just can't deal with it right now, so just go to your dig site and get on with it. I'll talk to you later." I head to my dig site, and what I find there almost has me in tears. When we'd packed up the previous day, our pit was 1 meter by 1 meter square, with a depth of 30 centimeters. I now stand before a 1 meter by 1 meter hole in the ground, dug down to a depth of approximately 3 meters. There are mounds of sandy dirt surrounding our pit, and I can see a multitude of objects that have been evacuated just sitting there. Other groups are staring at us, but trying to look as though they aren't staring. Nobody will speak to us either. Gaza is livid. The dude is almost apoplectic. Baza and Gaza are both looking very pale and like they want to puke. I'm all, what the ever-loving fuck has happened here? Who the fuck did this? It turns out that after everyone had left the site on Friday night, Baza and Daza had another mate of theirs in another group, we'll call him Keza, got together and got on the piss. That's drinking for our American friends. It was during this that they decided to continue digging our pit, so they broke into the cemetery with a shovel and proceeded to dig down until one of them passed out shit-faced at the bottom of a 1 meter by 1 meter hole in loose sandy soil. The fact that the dude managed to wake up and make it out of the hole without the entire thing collapsing in on him is a miracle in itself. Matt had been called out to the site at 3 a.m. by the police, who had been called because one of the residents in the area saw something dodgy going on. Needless to say, Bazza, Dazza, and Keza were all up shit creek in a barbed wire canoe with a rusty teaspoon for a paddle. They couldn't leave until they sobered up, but had been told that in no uncertain terms after the field school finished that day, they were to pack up and fuck off. Matt and his counterpart would deal with booting them from the archaeological program on the Tuesday after the field school ended. This left Gaza and I in a foobar situation. Luckily for him, Gaza was able to join the group that Keza had been part of, especially since the group were all from the sister campus. I, on the other hand, was left hanging like an unwanted tampon string out of the gusset of a bikini. There were no other groups that could take me, and besides, something had to be done about the clusterfuck that was my dig site. So Saturday ended up with me trying to document whatever I could, and to keep Bazza and Dazza out of my hair. I gave them my camera and told them to take photographic documentation of every single piece of evidence that they had dug up. They had to use the scale measurement and a title board that was supposed to identify them by date, location, spit level, etc. So off they went with a miniature whiteboard marker, scale measurement, and my camera. This kept them occupied for most of the day, as there were in excess of 200 items that they'd unearthed in their drunken dig for buried whatever the fuck they were looking for. I ended up filling in that hole, wishing with every shovelful of soil that Bazza and Dazza were still passed out drunk at the bottom, but such is life. Matt ended up tacking me onto another group in an observational role, as the members of that group were all from my campus and would be in the same second semester class as me. The Revenge. Now, as I previously mentioned, the field school was linked to another class held during the second semester. This class essentially took all of the data and evidence that had been unearthed during the field school, and you examined, tested, collated, and then submitted a report based on those findings as your final assessment piece. Seeing as how I only had 1 day's worth of actual data and evidence, I could not submit the field school report as required. As this was a core class and I didn't want to have to retake it for a 3rd year, I approached Matt to talk about how we could rectify this into a situation where I would be able to pass and continue with my studies. After some discussion, Matt agreed to allow me to do a field school critique, using what had happened to me as essentially a how-to on how not to conduct and participate in a field school. I had the data from the first day to use in class, and then photos and sketches taken by myself and the Dodgy brothers, Bazza and Dazza, of the objects we'd excavated. After developing the film of the field school, I noticed some interesting things. The candid photos I took on the Friday included shots of Bazza and Dazza not only behaving inappropriately, but interfering with the equipment we were using, and therefore possibly contaminating the data we had legitimately acquired. They were also shown to be in areas that we weren't allowed to be in, touching things that didn't belong to them, and also damaging ornaments left on some of the historic graves closest to the dig site. Then, there were the photos that they had taken on the Saturday. They had apparently decided that because I wasn't overjoyed with the fact that they'd completely screwed me over by digging that hole, they'd make the only photographs of the artifacts they'd unearthed unusable by writing inappropriate comments and cursing and slurs towards me on the title board. One of the ones that has stuck in my head was a large clay ceramic clam decoration, on which they'd written,
"Oh, I do love a day beside the seaside, with a hairy clam."
This was the only photo of the clam that had been taken. When we filled the pits back in, we had to reinter the artifacts, so I couldn't just take a new picture. Also, over 200 pieces had been unearthed, remember? And Matt had told me to use everything I had gathered to write my report, so I used every single photo, including the ones that wanted to see me next Tuesday, and not in the friendly way most Aussies use the term. And that alluded to writing sexual violence on me. At the end of the semester, I submitted my report, knowing full well that the best I could hope for was a pass. But that was enough to get me through to my final year. The fallout. I found this out from Matt at the beginning of my final year at uni. So it turns out that when Matt had booted the Dodgy brothers from the archaeological program, They had been allowed to continue on with their degree studying geology, but that they were not allowed to have anything to do with archaeology and were on very thin ice. When I submitted my report and Matt saw the extent of what they had done, kindly documented by themselves on the most part, and just how badly they had screwed me over, Gaza was fine, as the group he'd been moved to had all the appropriate data, and he'd been able to submit a proper field report. He went ballistic. He called a meeting with the deans from both campuses, the Department of Tropical Environments and Societies, Geology Department, and the Department of Anthropology, Archaeology and Society, Archaeology Department, for both campuses. He presented them my field report, told them how he had been teaching me for the past 3 years, and had it not been for the illness affecting me during my second year, I would now have likely completed my degree at this point. He also spoke about my previous field school, my behavior, and had I not been forced to withdraw due to my health, and based on previous work I'd submitted, I would likely have received a D or HD on my work. The fact that I averaged C and D during the time I was ill showed my academic prowess. The fact that the only grade he was able to give me for the report he currently had in his possession was a PC was a blow to my academic record that was wholly undeserved. He said a lot of other things, but the end result was that Baza and Daza were not only expelled from the archaeological program, they were now booted from the geological one as well. Furthermore, they were expelled and blacklisted from the university itself, which meant they could never re-enroll, and any other universities they applied to would be able to see this and the reasons why. Essentially, they were blocked from being able to obtain any university degree in that area, and to enroll in any university for a different career, they would have to wade through oceans of bureaucratic red tape and jump through so many hoops they'd make the Duracell bunny jealous. Unfortunately, this experience soured me on archaeology as a career path. Luckily for me, I was able to pick up a couple of extra courses in history and English, that I graduated with a BA and major in English literature and a minor in history and archaeology. I went back to uni after a gap year and obtained my grad, dip, in secondary education. Two. Around 2007 to 2008, I was in the process of changing my full-time job, retail to banking. I also had a part-time job in a village pub. Every weekend we would have live music acts on. Some were good, others not so much. This story relates to probably the best band we had play. Bit of a setup. The landlord of the pub had recently acquired another well-established pub in another nearby village. This pub was different. It had a restaurant and rooms for hire. He was an alright kind of guy, likable but hard-nosed if it came to it. He would help anyone if he could, but with his business, it was his way or the highway. He also had fingers in a lot of pies. This was from the pubs he had to creating awards for dog shows. In the pub he acquired, the staff had a uniform purchased by the previous owner before he sold up. In our pub we wore jeans and drinks company branded t-shirts, think Stella, Carling, Smirnoff, etc. Some of the other pub staff came to my pub to help, as the landlord had decided our quaint little watering hole should start doing more food options than just crisps and peanuts. We had a new kitchen fitted, and a menu drawn up. Rumors went about that we would be getting a uniform so that we fit in with the new restaurant feel of the pub. The issue we found, myself and the two barmaids, was that we did our own cleaning after a shift, whereas the other pub had a professional cleaning crew come on every weekend. Our cleaning entailed bleach mopping the floors as well as the toilets. We didn't care usually, part of the job and all that jazz, because the landlord sourced us seemingly endless supplies of t-shirts, which could result, and cheaply be replaced. Did I mention that we found out the uniform would have to be supplied by ourselves? The uniform? Black suits for us men, white shirts and black ties, dress shoes obviously. Ladies, black shirts, white blouses. My problem was that the 4 suits that I owned were all high-end and weren't cheap. I asked if we were seriously being asked to wear these kind of things and to supply them ourselves. We were. He didn't mention when this would be starting, but that it would be soon. I asked if he could supply even a very cheap pair of black trousers and a shirt, due to the cleaning we would still be doing at the end of our shift. Flat out no. I had a week's holiday booked, so I left it in his hands to come up with a solution whilst I was away. I came back on the Friday night, and the band we had on had arrived early to set up, as is normal. People had already started to arrive, as this group were liked by so many, so people would turn up to hear them soundcheck and practice. I turned up in jeans and t-shirt to see the two barmaids in black skirts, etc. Nobody had told me that the uniform change had been instigated. The landlord came through the bar and asked where my suit was. I said that I hadn't been informed, and I still wouldn't have worn it, as I was not going to be using bleach whilst wearing it. This is where the hard-nosed side came out, and also where the MC appeared. He said you can go home and change, or you can hand in your till key and leave. So I handed him my till key, apologized to the two barmaids for leaving them in the lurch, got my coat, and went home. A while later I was back at the pub with two mates, listening to an awesome night of rock cover versions of classic feel-good songs. The best part was seeing the landlord behind the bar trying to cope with a full 40-foot bar, 3 customers deep. He was supposed to have been taking his wife and daughter out to a new restaurant in the next big town that had opened. He had to cancel his plans and work. I felt sorry for the ladies I left there to work, but I did get a huge kick out of seeing him working. I stayed until closing time, then as they started to clean I left. The cherry on top. When I came back in, I was wearing one of my suits. This isn't a massive malicious compliance, but one I took great pleasure in carrying out. I loved that job, and as it turns out I left at the right time. He sold that pub within a year as business tanked. Our village, as it turns out, did not want a restaurant. They were quite happy with their quaint little out-of-the-way watering hole just as it was. 3. Years ago, I had a boss that was interesting. He was usually a decent guy to be around and was good at some of the particulars of the job. But when it came to the day-to-day stuff, he was just clueless and, or admittedly, didn't care about pitching in since he knew everyone else could cover it. When he wasn't busy or was stressing about something, he really liked just hanging around and chit-chatting, even if we were busy or, in my case, on my lunch break. I'd asked him repeatedly not to come find me on my breaks, which I took outside, and talked my ear off as it's the only personal time I get in the day, and I'd really rather not be bothered by anything work-related during. It's important to note that every position in the company below his is hourly. At this point, I was a few steps down the ladder from his position. During one of these interruptions, he mentions an unpleasant call he just had with his boss and asks if I want to hear about it. I told him, no, not particularly. I'd like to finish eating, go for a walk, and read for a bit. Then when I come back, clock in, and am an actively working employee, I'd be game to talk about it as much as you'd like. Even when he was either grating on our nerves or making inappropriate jokes and comments, one thing I'll give him is that we could show some frustrations by making direct comments like that, and he'd actually take the hint. Sort of. Apologize and back off. By the time I came back from break, he'd gathered all the FT staff and made a show of how I made them wait. Then he goes on a tirade about OT and how we're not to get a minute of it going forward. This is immediately after his demand that we all work open to close for the last 2 weeks during our busy season, which is roughly 12 to 13-hour days. Exhausting? Yes. But I relied on that overtime for years, we have multiple busy seasons a year, to put into savings as the pay otherwise was okay-ish. He also routinely asks me to stay a bit past my scheduled time to help with things. So already I'm thinking this could mean I'll be able to make up the potential overtime by leaving early on Fridays. Cue malicious compliance. Going forward, I start ending my lunch breaks, usually an hour, the moment either he or anyone else finds me a work-related question. I'll walk back inside, clock in, and then discuss whatever they'd like. I then say I'm taking my paid 15 to 20 minute break to go finish my food and take a shorter walk, and wouldn't clock out again to finish the actual unpaid hour break, since it was interrupted, HR violation which I documented. I'd always stay after my shift was supposed to end if he or anyone else needed a hand. I was good friends with the delivery folks on our route, and they'd start coming later and later to do our pickups and help me pad out my time and claim traffic was getting so bad in the area, since they all thought he was a twat anyway. And I was ostensibly put in charge of deliveries and pickups for some reason. By Thursday evening, I'd look at my timesheet and calculate when I need to leave the following day to avoid any overtime, which I'd make sure everyone was aware of so there'd be no surprises. Of course, there were always surprises when I'd abruptly end a conversation or stop helping a customer, etc., and just pack up and walk out the door. It got to the point where I'd show up at 7. I was the opening manager, this is retail. No one else would show up until 8:30 to 9, then I'd be leaving around 10 a.m. Eventually, I'd stopped coming in most Fridays at all, and told the boss he'd have to open as I wasn't willing to come in for literally 1 hour before leaving again. And as I'm well beyond meeting what I need to do to keep FT status, I'd just lose an hour, or stay extra late that night before, if need to be to hit 40 on the dot. It got to the point where he initiated a conversation involving HR on my leaving so early on days we need life at Moonlight, and how I was abusing the system. When the HR rep said this was a fairly serious allegation, and what I had to say in response, I pulled out my notebook with daily breakdown showing what I actively did during chunks of time, including timestamps for beginning and interrupted lunch breaks, and the content of the interruption, extra projects put on me and how that extended my day, etc. They looked over it for all of 3 or 4 minutes before sighing, handing it back and telling me I could go. Ironically, right after the meeting ended, I had to rush to go clock out, or I'd have been on OT and left. That Monday, my boss tries to play it off like, I got away with it once, but don't try it again, but is being very cautious regarding asking for help, for things that are his direct responsibility anyway, and only come out to talk to me one further time before seeing my notebook next to me, and sheepishly walking away. The OT ruling came and went for years, so I'd either keep mysteriously racking up extra time to leave early, delayed pickups for our shipments, or would work open to close of my own choosing when they randomly decided they didn't care about OT for a few months. Either way, I was never bothered regarding how I fluctuated with my schedule again. 4. I drive for an auto parts store for a living. Occasionally, I am asked to give a coworker a ride with me to another location, and I am always happy to do so. During one such time, the coworker who was riding with me was yammering my ear off. She was an expert yammerer. This I didn't mind, but after a while, the swearing in her yammering was starting to irritate me. Now, I am not the swear please by any stretch of the imagination. I'm in the auto service industry. It is understood that the language can get a bit rough and or vulgar. Being that my dad was a mechanic, I'm used to this and was not offended. I'll admit that I have been known to drop a colorful metaphor into conversation from time to time. However, my coworker's use of swearing was beginning to sound like a little kid who had just discovered dirty words and was trying to sound cool by using them too much. There were more vulgarities than regular words. I started to feel embarrassed for her and wondered how I could kindly yet effectively tell her to either shut up or grow up. She paused for a moment, probably for a breath, and then realized that my radio was on.
What in the holy hell are you listening to?
She eloquently asked.
That I should be so brave to ask.
I'm listening to morning mass on Catholic radio. It sometimes grounds me for the day.
Fair enough,
she replied simply, and then was quiet for an entire minute. That minute's silence was possibly a personal record for her. After that delightful silence, she continued on with her breathless yammering, except that her language had mysteriously become incredibly clean. Even at one point, stopped herself briefly, and then used the word darn. Apparently, for the moment, that is how I got her to shut up and grow up. 5. As we found out that we'd be expecting not 1 but 2 kids, we knew we had to move to a real house with more space. At the time, we were still living in a 1-bedroom studio 1 up from the ground floor, with its only entrance being a metal fire escape, stairs. Not ideal for a pregnant woman, let alone to live with 2 small babies. So we found a privately leased house that was newly renovated and had all the room and a large garden we were looking for. Signed the lease and immediately collected the keys. As the owner drove off, the woman next door comes up to me, immediately demanding we not make noise before noon, as her boyfriend works night and sleeps in, and a whole bunch of other do's and don'ts. So right off the bat we knew trouble incoming. As the house was fully renovated and not much had to be done, we were like, don't poke the bear. We'll do all the things that make noise afternoon. We moved in after 2 weeks, and the whole street was warm and welcoming. My wife was almost due giving birth to my 2 twin daughters, and some offer help with anything we needed, real kind people. They also told us about our neighbors. Nobody liked them. He was a big bully and got into arguments with everybody, and were also known as radio pirates, as in illegal broadcasting on radio with all Dutch bangers. This music is just terror on your ears and possibly used on terrorists on black sites. Which went alongside them partying Thursday till Sunday till 5 in the morning. Loud music, constant yelling, always drunken, etc. Really something to look forward to when moving in, certainly with 2 babies on the way. The partying began immediately, full blast, real classy for someone demanding to be quiet when douchebag needs his beauty sleep. Then one day, my father-in-law came to put new grass in. He has his trailer parked at the back of our houses, which is public space. Not according to him, though. No, that exact spot where the trailer, filled with grass sods, quite heavy stuff, was parked, was his spot, and we had to move the trailer. Not going to happen, as I was not planning to walk all the way around the house with the grass sods. He gets angry right away and demanded me move it. I told him to go fuck himself. I was done with him already then and there. I'm also a ginger, so besides having no soul, I do have a temper, which is always in check until you provoke me repeatedly. Anyone who knows me will tell me that you really had to make an effort for that to happen. We went on working, and end of the day comes when my father-in-law wants to leave. Hooks up the trailer, and bam, there was douchebag telling him off, yelling it's his spot, and he better not do this again or else. Mess with me all you want, I can handle it. But what you don't do is threaten my family. I ran outside and told him in no uncertain terms to back off or he'll be the sorry one. Total bluff on my side. Yes, I have that temper, but I'm not impressively built, and have no hidden fighting skills. I do fight dirty. He backs off, father-in-law leaves, and I go inside where I find my wife crying. She got scared of him maybe doing something to her father and or me, and this is something we don't need right now. Combined with hormones from being pregnant, and you can paint that picture. So I'm even more pissed, and had to promise not to act on anything. I won't, dear, not yet, anyway. Time went on without any real incident, and then came the time when my wife does go into labor. Didn't go smooth, and ended up having to deliver with a C-section, or whatever it's called. Because daughter 2 was almost strangled by the umbilical cord. We had to stay 3 nights, excruciating nights due to a lot of things. Finally, we get to go home. Family had put a giant sign in our front yard welcoming the babies. The sign was already up for a few days prior to coming home, so our friendly neighbors definitely knew about it. But did they give a flying fuck? No, they did not. From the first night on, they started to party and broad-blasted their terror music. They started at noon and continued until 5 or 6 in the morning. Classy. They also kept going for days, so it wasn't just Thursday to Sunday. It was all week long and the next. So we were broken, hardly slept, one of our daughters suffered from heavy cramps combined with all the noise, and her parents at the end of their wits, so she cried a lot. And I just had it. I researched some things on radio pirates, the laws and regulations, and on his large 5-meter-plus antenna in the backyard, which was illegal in itself, but he used it to illegally broadcast on radio, which meant he had a lot of equipment to do so, which was even more illegal and can even get you jailed. But at the very least I could seize it all and find him big time, in the 10 to 45,000 area. Now, I did not immediately turn him in, but instead we were looking for another house to lease first. This because I figured it wouldn't sit well with him and having a wife and 2 babies in the house alone during the day, because I had to go to work. I hear you guys thinking, why not involve the police? Well, they are utterly useless in cases like this. We called once, and what they did disturbs me to this day. They rang their doorbell and immediately started off by saying we called them about noise complaints. Yes, you heard that right. No protection or whatsoever. They just blatantly told them we were the reason they're there, told them to keep it down, and that was it. They didn't even follow up with us or anything. As you can guess, douchebag was now even more pissed and told me the next day, or yelled over the fence that separates our backyards, that I really should not do that again. A threat, yet again, of which I told the police. I didn't report it the first time, as I chalked it up to alpha male and the heat of the moment. But without witnesses to corroborate, nothing could be done yet again. Some days later, I walked out the front door, and he just stepped out of his car. Came up to me demanding I cut back some of our ivy that grew on our side of the fence, because it tangled in with his big-ass antenna. He would be gone for some hours, and I could come into his garden to cut back the ivy that grew through on their side. And then a light bulb went on above my head. I told him politely that I would do that immediately. Why? Because that gave me an opportunity to find out the make and model of this antenna, to ascertain its signal strength, where the cables go exactly, and what kind of cables they were. Again, to know the signal strength it handled. Also, it gave me a good view on the equipment he had. Through the window, so I could snap some photographs of it. This was the icing on the cake, because in the meantime we did manage to find a new home and already had signed the lease, so we would be gone in 2 weeks. Luckily, we only had to paint some walls for the girls' room, and furthermore, just pack up our things and move them to the other house. So, after I trimmed the ivy and collected my evidence, I went online that night to find out the proper channels to report a broadcast pirate, and which entity was tasked with catching said pirate. Turned out, I had to call the telecom agency, but also the police. Wasn't too happy with the latter, but I remembered I have a nephew that works for the police. Officially his area was immigration, but knew enough colleagues that could help us, and we could trust not to confront them again, saying I was the one that sent them. That was extremely important for our safety when doing what I was doing. So I gave both the agency and the police all the evidence I collected, pointed them to the frequencies he pirated so they could listen in. Then they started a neighborhood investigation, which wasn't really necessary, but this was to cover our asses to make it look like he got caught by accident, because they had an active investigation in our area. You never know what you can learn from legal documents and such. We asked them to wait with the raid. Yes, they raid pirates' houses, preferably in the early hours of the day, because of his beauty sleep rendering him incapable of fleeing or hiding evidence, etc. We moved 2 weeks later, and they raided him 2 days after we moved. All of his equipment, computers, radios, cell phones, and his car were seized. He left in cuffs. His wife or girlfriend did too, for making a big scene and trying to interfere, all of which was live reported to me by one of my ex-neighbors who were equally ecstatic about this. It turned out this wasn't the first time he got caught, but his third time. His car had no insurance on it, and his MOT failed. This would normally have no big consequence because he didn't drive it while raided, but they had the guy surveilled on for a week, and that definitely meant he was seen driving it while not having insurance and valid MOT. He was fined somewhere around 30,000 euros and went to jail for 12 weeks, and everything seized was destroyed except the car. His girlfriend had to do 40-some hours of community service. They had to sell the house, which made for very happy neighbors as they too were over and done with them. Like I said, I do fight, but very dirty. You have to really make an effort for me to get to that point. They did, and suffered. Over a year later, when shopping groceries, I encountered them with the foulest of looks. If looks could kill, I'd be a smoldering heap of ash. But nothing more than that. Hey everybody, Hellfreezer here, and thank you very much for listening to Revenge is Ice Cream, episode 77. And thank you very much to everybody who allowed me to use their stories in this video. Let's see, I think I have a little bit of a shout out. There we go. Yes, we do. Come on. Babe. There we are. Let's see, any shout-outs? Nope. There was one, but I had to make a quick change to the story lineup. Okay. Oh yeah, if you liked the video, then please do the thing. Brain not work good. What thing? Oh, yes, please hit the like button for me. Hit subscribe if you want to see more. And if you're feeling up to it, leave a comment. Yes, lovely. Well, today I learned that pirate radio is apparently still a thing. Who'd have thought people would even bother with that, the illegality of it, when you've got the internet? Obviously, you still have to worry about the legal aspects of the music. You need to have the rights to use the music, but why not do it online? Although it does sound like old Captain Pirate Radio there, that his goal was to be as much of an obnoxious wanker as possible. Mission accomplished, I suppose. Well, with that, I'm going to head off for now. So until next time, thank you very much for listening, and take very good care of yourselves.